So we all have a lot in common here in the room. We love entrepreneurship, otherwise we wouldn't be here, and we all are here to learn about how do we navigate in the global marketplace in regards to manufacturing. And there's another really important part too that we have in common, and that is that each of you has your knowledge, a piece of something that somebody else in the room can really benefit from. And the problem is when we come to these venues and these gatherings, if we don't really leverage that and really get out and work together with, to get to know other people, we end up leaving our piece of the puzzle locked up with ourselves and not going out to others where it should. So I'm going to encourage you to get to know each other, and let's start right now with seeing who's in the room. So we have several different demographics here today. We have some high school students, I believe, right? Raise your, yeah, right over here. All right, let's hear it for the high school students, yeah. Awesome, and we also have some college students here. Who are the college students? Yeah, awesome, give them a hand. And educators. Who are the educators in the room? Yes, awesome. Thank you so much for coming. And then also business consultants. Who's a business consultant in the room? Yeah, a few. Excellent. Yeah. All right, and then of course, entrepreneurs in the room. Who is an entrepreneur? And I hope you all raise your hand. Well, yes, because everybody's aspiring at least. So, what we want to do during this time to really unlock all of the knowledge and things that you have to offer others is I'm going to give you a challenge and ask you to complete this during the time that you're here today. What I'm going to ask you to do is to make 3 connections today. 1 by asking somebody for something. 1 by making an introduction, so you introducing someone to someone else. And then a 3rd one is to help someone. And these are people that you don't know, okay? So that's the idea here. So I'm going to give you a moment here actually to get started, and I'm going to give you a couple minutes. What I'd like you to do is connect with somebody who you don't know and find something that you have in common. It's a timed event. Somebody you don't know, go now. Okay, that's it. Go ahead and close off your conversation. Excellent. Hey, that's a nice start. It's so nice to see you engaging. Yeah, so now that we know each other a little bit more and we're getting connected here, let's take a look at what we are here to do today. So really what this is about is helping startups successfully navigate the global manufacturing. And there's 3 ways we're interested in doing that. One is providing framework, tools, and resources, including educational opportunities at our region's community colleges and high schools too, for helping startups navigate this manufacturing. And another focus is to provide the opportunity for you to make strategic connections, which you're doing right now, with students, entrepreneurs, and educators and business consultants in the room, and also those that are not in the room that you can get connections to by talking to some of our presenters who can refer you. And we're also here to support educators in implementing content from the event today into their courses. You can, if you're not aware, if you're an educator at the high school or college level in our region, you are invited to create a classroom activity that integrates this knowledge so that it gets directly into your students' hands. And we have Karen over here. Could you stand? Yeah. Karen Miles is here. If you have any questions about that, she can address them for you. Thank you, Karen. So here's the important thing. This is what education is about. It's about bringing students with those who are in business, you know, with educators, because this is how we learn as educators what we need to have in the classroom. This is where students, if you're not getting the education that you feel like you should get, where you get to have a voice at the table. You know, it's where consultants can learn tools and frameworks that you can help your clients navigate manufacturing more easily, or at least avoid some of the things that can get in the way. All right, and it's where entrepreneurs, you can connect with the resources that you need, and also voice from your perspective, now that you are doing your own thing. What was it that you learned that really helped you, and what is it that that you wish you would have learned? And so all of that we're going to be inviting in interaction today, and not just to hear it, but to actually take action on it. So with that, let's get started. This is the model of what we're going to be presenting today. So the first thing that we're going to be going over is a three-phase strategy for moving through the global manufacturing process. First, we're going to look at market validation and rough prototyping. And we're going to then look at small-scale manufacturing. Then we're going to look at large-scale manufacturing. And before we go any further, I would really like to acknowledge two people in the room that were instrumental in putting this together. And we have here one of our presenters today, Lou Izzo. He was actually worked as a consultant for putting this model together so it's easier for you to teach and learn global manufacturing. And also involved with it was Django Dexter, who is also a presenter. And so the fruits of their work is what you're getting here right now. So after we go through that manufacturing process, we need to know the other things that affect it that you need to know about, which is intellectual property, funding, and the trends that you need to keep an eye on. The funding for this event is provided by the State Chancellor's Office under the Doing What Matters for Jobs in the Economy framework, and our Center for International Trade and Development, hosted at Santa Barbara City College. We would like to thank our sponsors in kind, which are all of our speakers and the organizations that support small businesses like the SBDC and the Scheinfeld Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. Let's give them a hand, please. They're here on their own accord and in their interest. My name is Julie Samson. I'm the Regional Director for Global Trade and Logistics, hosted by Santa Barbara City College. And what I'm going to present is the segment on market validation and rough prototyping. My question to you is, are you ready to go? Let's go. Okay, so here we are, the first step in the pyramid that we're working on. So I'm going to start off with a question. We have two startup progressions here. Which of these reduces financial risk? Take a look. Top one, first you have an idea, then you build it, then you brand it, then you get it to your customer. Second one, on the bottom, you have an idea, you find your customers, you build it, then you brand it. How many say the top one reduces financial risk? Raise your hand. Oh, and the bottom one. Okay, yes, and why? Who can tell me? Yes.
Because you're finding out what the customer wants before you invest much money to build it.
Absolutely, right? Reducing financial risk by finding out what your customer wants so that you don't end up building something that they don't want. Very good. Now, the question is, how do we do this? And the answer is market validation. Market validation is a series of interviews with people in your target market. What you're trying to do is build your tribe, your community, whatever word you want to put on it. What it's about these days in terms of having success as a business is not just doing one-off sales, but building an entire community that follows you through the life cycle of your business. In order to do market validation, there are 3 stages that I've identified that are important for you to know about: problem solution fit, solution target market fit, and solution market fit. Let's take a look at those. What this requires of you at any stage is that you become a detective. Okay, too often as entrepreneurs, we have a lot of great ideas and we let them ruminate in our heads and with our friends, and we develop them. We might even write business plans about them, but we might even try to launch them without getting in touch with who we think our customer is going to be and actually asking them what their thoughts are about the problem that we think they have, and what kinds of solutions are they currently using, and a host of other questions. Okay, so our challenge is to make sure that our development is customer-centric. Let's take a look at the first step. Essentially, this is what you're going to investigate. Does your target market have the compelling problem or compelling desire that you think they do? And is your target market dissatisfied with their current solution? And are they motivated enough by pain or by desire to purchase a better solution, which would be yours? These are good questions to ask. What you need to do is put yourself in the path of your target market at a time when they are willing to talk with you. So this is not going to a restaurant, you know, during the busy rush hour and asking the manager if you can have a few moments of his time. Part of your challenge is to find where is your target market where they have the availability to speak with you and to spend some time with you. These are some good questions to ask. So one of it is, what is your greatest challenge with X? So somebody give me a problem that they're solving. Let's use it as an example. John, we're going to use yours. Beach tar on your feet. This is John Harmon, founder of Oil Slick Beach Tar Remover. Let's give him a hand. So this might be the way that John would have questioned back long ago, and he's very successful now, so I think these are probably the questions that he asked. So, hey, so what's your greatest challenge with getting beach tar off your feet? You know, and the question would be, where would he go in order to find people who are relaxed enough or in a state of mind where they can talk with him? Well, he went to the beach, right, and asked people there. He asked what solutions have they tried, and what I know, some of the answers that John got was petroleum products and baby oil, and I guess that is a petroleum product, and other kinds of oils, and he asked what has worked and what hasn't. You know, what did they like about it? What they didn't? What don't they like about it? You know, they didn't like that they were toxic. They didn't like that they were messy. Right? And what would be the ideal solution? Well, it would take away those pains and take care of the problem of getting beach tar off the feet that ends up in the car and in the carpeting at home and all of those kinds of things, right? And then what would the ideal solution be worth to you? Now, I'm going to ask you, what is the strategic piece of information that you're going to get from each of these questions? From the first one, you're looking at, do they have this problem? You know, are they in your target market, and are they encountering the problem that you think that they do? You know, if you ask, what solutions have you tried, what is that telling you about? Yes?
For example, if something didn't work for them, you can find out so that you don't do something too similar to that, so that it seems different, so that they be willing to buy your product.
Yeah, yeah. So You'll know what has worked and what hasn't worked, so you can do things similar to maybe what did work and find out solutions to what did not work. The asking what solutions have you tried can also indicate who your competitors are, right? Because if other people are, if your target market is using them, that's your competitors. You can asking them the ideal solution. Why is that a good question? What strategic piece of information would you get from that? Yes.
Trying to find out how you can cater your product to meet their desires.
Yes, what they're interested in from their perspective, right? So it gets you out of your head and into theirs. And then how much would it be worth to you? A really important thing about that is how motivated are they to get a solution? Some people, you may have a good idea, but they're not interested in paying for it. It's not a big enough problem for them. So when you're doing having these conversations, for those people who are really show interest in your idea, get their contact information. You know why? Because these could become your very first customers. And if they're that interested in it right now, they're the people that once you have your prototype, you're going to get in front of them. So with the second stage, we get into solution and target market fit. So where you have a solution after talking to your target market, and you are going to get it in front of them. Notice in that first conversation, you didn't even talk about what your solution was. Now you turn to what your solution is. You're looking at what features do they want, what price matters to them, and how much urgency do they have. What you have to have in order to move into this step is a prototype, which is a preliminary model of your product that becomes more refined over time through customer-centric development, in other words, listening to your customer. It starts with an inexpensively made and unrefined model constructed of everyday materials. So I always tell my students, if you're not a little bit embarrassed about your first prototype, you've probably worked on it too much. And then progressively over time, you'll use, when you're in connection face-to-face with your customer and getting feedback from them, your prototype will become refined. And also what you'll want to be doing is, even though you're not quite ready, reaching out to engineers and manufacturers, because there could be things about your product that the way you're thinking about it doesn't really make sense design-wise. Or it could be for manufacturing that if you just tweaked it a little bit in a different way, it might bring the cost down. So even at this stage, though it's really quite early, that information will be really valuable to you when you end up going to your manufacturers and are actually working to bring a working prototype to market. So essentially, you're going in this cycle. You have your prototype, you test it in front of your customers, you analyze the results, you refine your prototype if needed, and continue until how long? Well, you could go on forever, asking customers, and there would probably always be something else that they want. But the thing is, identifying the key things that are the deal breakers for them, and focusing on those things to get your minimum viable product, the simplest thing that you can bring to market, the simplest version. Here's an example. So your prototype might first be a concept sketch, and then you might do a 3D model of it through 3D printing, and then you might market or manufacture the actual product. Right here, a key holder. This is another example, actually, somebody who will be on our panel today who developed Umbi dog bed. This is Rochelle Smith. Started out as a drawing, made her first prototypes, got it in front of her customer, and ended up where she is right now with a very different look and feel than her first prototype, all because of customer feedback. So here's some questions that you could ask. If these three solutions were available to you, which would be most attractive? Now notice which three solutions or which couple of solutions. Notice that a suggestion here is that you have more than one idea of how this could go. The reason being is that when you go to manufacture, you may find that your manufacturer can't do it in that particular color at that price that you want, or can't get that particular material that you thought would be great, or if they might have to change it in some way. And if you've done your homework up front and you've really gotten a feel for your customers of what's deal breakers and what's negotiable, that's going to serve you down the road. If this solution were available, what price would it be worth to you? Again, looking at their price. When would you be ready? How soon would you be ready to purchase and implement this solution? That gives a sense of urgency. And can we contact you when our solution is available? Those that are really interested in this are going to say, yes, do contact me. Let me know when you bring it to market. I'm already ready to buy it. So in the third stage, it's solution market fit. Okay, this is about having your working prototype that's ready for sales. Okay, and essentially, if you stayed in contact and worked those people through into your community, these are likely to be your first customers, and the customers that will also give you referrals because they've been with you through the entire process, and they have trust in you, and they know you. Okay, I just took you through the experience of market validation and doing rough prototyping. We have time for a couple of questions. Anybody have any questions about this? Yes?
When prototyping, is there a specific way to like qualify manufacturers like at that point?
I'm so glad you asked that. The question was, is there a specific way to qualify manufacturers? And actually, that's going to lead us into our next presentation when we go into the manufacturing phase. So I don't know, if everybody's ready, I think maybe we'll head that way. So I would like to invite now Django Dexter up to the stage. Yes. So let me tell you about Django. You have your speaker profiles there, but let me give you an idea of who he is. He's an international manufacturing executive based in Santa Barbara. He's senior director at MMI Holdings, where he directly manages the global manufacturing and sale of 800 million products per year. He has accumulated a broad knowledge of high-volume domestic and overseas manufacturing through his 15-year career and has founded multiple companies along the way. Django is a specialist in business development, product engineering, and strategic market development. He's very active in the startup support, entrepreneurial services, and collegiate mentorship in Santa Barbara, and assisting startups with navigating the difficult world of overseas marketing. He holds a mechanical engineering degree and has 25 granted U.S. and international patents. All right, let's give him another hand. Yeah, for sure. And I get to sit down. I'm so excited. Okay.
Morning, everyone.
Okay, so Django, that's a pretty impressive professional background you have.
Yeah, it's taken a few years, but
Yeah. So tell us a bit more. So I went through your bio, but can you go in a little bit more specifically, like how exactly do you help entrepreneurs through the manufacturing process? What kinds of things do you do?
yeah. So my career has been at many levels globally. So I've been a startup entrepreneur before, launching companies from ground zero. I've also taken products to Asia and had them manufactured. I've worked for U.S. manufacturers. I've actually worked for Asian manufacturers. I've basically touched every sort of combination of relationship that you come across. So in 2013, my partner Dave and I launched a company to help consult the startup community here in Santa Barbara for helping people navigate that difficult world of maybe you've got a prototype, maybe you've got funding, but you need to go to the next step of finding a manufacturer for your product. And so we would help, we can help startup entrepreneurs find ways to find manufacturers that are reputable, that suit the needs of the product and of the client, and match them together. So we do that. Yeah.
And that's just so amazing. I love that service that you provide, because those of us who work with entrepreneurs and those of us who have developed our own products, that once you get through that initial stage, you know,
Right.
you've done your rough prototype, things are looking good. You know, taking those next steps can really thwart advancement with an idea. And so I'm so happy that you provide that service. So during a conversation that we had earlier, there were two different basic categories of manufacturers that you mentioned, and those are short-run manufacturers and production-oriented manufacturers. And I was wondering if you could help us understand the difference.
Yeah. So in the early stages of prototype development, and you did a great job of laying out all of the key steps in that process. But undoubtedly there's going to be refinement of your design and of your strategy. And so when you talk to the customers, at the end of that prototyping process, you may find a very different product than what you thought you would start with. And short-run manufacturers or prototyping companies, which are common here in California, actually, south of us here in Santa Barbara, there are plenty, and north, probably not until you get to San Jose. But there are a lot of manufacturers that have design capabilities that can run short-run prototyping type of product. And having somebody locally that you can work with face-to-face, same time zone, same language, is really helpful. So I would advise entrepreneurs to work with local companies to figure out the refinement of the product first before going to the next stage, which would be the production manufacturers. And that's when you get the cost down low enough to be competitive in your market. So the short term is really understanding the product itself and refinement with the customer, as you mentioned. And then once that has been validated, you go to the production phase. And that's typically overseas, depending on the product. And that's a very different phase than the prototyping phase.
Yes. Okay, great. Now, so say an entrepreneur is at the point where they've completed that phase one that we talked about, and they've done their rough prototype, they've validated that there is interest, and now they're ready for this phase two. Where, and this is where they get their prototype in front of the customers for further testing, like we've talked about. It sounds like the short-run manufacturer is what you're saying is where we should go, and that it's best to go regional rather than work with manufacturers overseas. And
in most cases, yeah.
Yeah. And so let's just draw out a little bit more what some of those reasons are for going local.
Yeah,
Domestic.
like I mentioned, working with somebody close, somebody that you can actually go and visit and look at where they are with the manufacturing of your device. There will be, depending on the product, there will be what's called DFM, which is Design for Manufacturability. So this is something that you essentially would submit your design to the manufacturer or the prototype shop or whoever you're using to build the product. And they would provide you back with what's in the industry called a DFM. And the DFM is essentially their input on your design from a manufacturability standpoint. They'll say, hey, you're specifying a sharp corner on this feature, it should really be a radius. Or you're specifying this surface finish, but the capability of the equipment that we have to build it is really this surface finish. You know, it's that type of interaction and feedback through the DFM process that will help you refine your product from a manufacturability standpoint. And then as you mentioned, you need to weigh that with the customer side. Is that a must-have or is it a luxury? And so the design will morph slightly. But that interaction between you and the manufacturer for that DFM process is critical. And to have somebody local to work with through that process is very, very helpful.
And you're not having to deal with time changes.
That's right.
And communication issues, language
That's right.
or time.
Yeah, and I'd suggest California and even this portion of California over somewhere else in the country. It's really, the goal is to be local, if you can.
Okay, yeah. Okay, now, so after we talked last time, you know, you had said, I had asked, so how do we find these manufacturers? And you had said, well, Google it and ask, you know, people that you know, get referrals, that kind of thing. And so I did Google it, you know, asking for the right thing, which is the, you know, the short run, you know, the prototyping types of manufacturers. And there are quite a few. And so say that we get connected to those. Lou is going to go into the vetting process with those, but I was wondering, you know, how, once somebody has identified a manufacturer who they think is going to be a good fit for them, how do they prepare for that? What do they have to have in hand? What do they need to have done in order for the manufacturer to pay attention to them?
Yeah. It's not as scary as it might sound. It's really a relationship that you're starting to build. So it's as simple as reaching out and communicating with them. And any manufacturer, whether they're a prototype or a big production facility, will have somebody within that facility that it's their job to interact with the client, somebody in sales. And they will tell you exactly what they need from you in order to quote the job. So essentially, the very first step is to do as much research online that you can to just figure out, okay, well, this one manufacturer seems like somebody I should reach out to. It's as simple as picking up the phone or sending an email and saying, hey, I've got this type of product. Does this sound like something that you can manufacture? And there may be a preliminary, yeah, let's check it out, let's see it, you know, or whatever. And then it's a matter of I would suggest face-to-face if you can, but email is fine, to give them the specifications of your product. So this is a very important thing. We see, you know, sketches a lot. We see cardboard mock-ups depending on the product, but it really needs to be specified with drawings, engineering drawings or blueprints for a factory to be able to quote the job. And you want that definition of your product defined so well that if you gave that print package or the specification package to 3 different manufacturers and actually had them build them, you'd get back 3 of the exact same product. It's defined so well that anybody that would build it to your specifications would be building the identical, you know, the identical product. So it's tough because at that stage you might not have it that well defined, but you do need to have, when you're requesting quotes from manufacturers, you do need to have specifications of the product such that they can quote it back to you. Yeah, and there are some, if that's too big of a hurdle to overcome, there are some development companies that have design resources on staff that will actually help you refine that product, but they would charge for that service.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is there any benefit to going with a designer that would be an engineer that would be with that company versus external, you know, cost-wise, or?
So a lot of the time, there are a lot of resources available locally here for freelance engineers or engineering contractors that you can actually hire to do some refinement of your product and define it in a specification package that you can then give to manufacturers to quote. So you can do that process on your own ahead of time. That's actually a quite common way of going about it, as opposed to starting from scratch with the manufacturer and having them develop it. The problem with having your manufacturer help develop the product is you're somewhat beholden to them. Yeah. You know, you'll want to be able to have that specification package quoted across multiple manufacturers to weigh the pros and cons of each manufacturer. And if you're having the manufacturer themselves develop that product for you, that could be quite difficult.
Yes. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so we have to have the technical drawings, and I think before you also mentioned to me volume projections and target pricing.
Yeah.
So at this point in time, they need to have that as well.
If you're going to be weighing multiple manufacturers, you want to be able to provide that information. That way you'll be able to understand whether or not they're going to be capable of producing your product. So for instance, if you start with a small run prototype shop and they can only build 1,000 units a month and you need 10,000, then automatically they can't be considered. And so you have to have that capacity or volume discussion pretty early on. And that goes along with pricing too. If pricing is through the roof, you'd probably want to understand why they're quoting it that way.
Yeah.
But that can be a disqualifier early on. So it's really the low-hanging fruit, getting that part out of the way early in the discussion allows you to narrow your choices for manufacturers as early as possible.
Okay, okay, great. So now we get to, this bit about the engineering drawings. It's kind of a similar question. We asked, well, how do you go about finding a prototyping manufacturer? As far as finding the engineer, you said you can go external, you can do internal, but are there, and the pros and cons of that you went over, but are there any things as far as engineering that an entrepreneur should look for? Any positive things or any things that should be a red flag to them?
Yeah, I think when you're looking for resources that you don't contain yourself or on your startup team, you always have to weigh. You always have to ask yourself, what am I looking for, and what types of qualities will this service be providing us, and sort of block out everything else. So when you're looking for a contract engineer maybe to put a design package together for you, or a specification package such that you can give to manufacturers, you want to see examples of their work. You want to talk to other clients of theirs and ask them whether or not it's worked for them, references essentially. Because a fantastic engineer may not have much experience working with a startup, and so they may not be well suited. So it's really a conversation of understanding whether or not that fit is right. And I think that's going to be pretty evident once you have conversations with them. So that could be for the engineering resources that you might be contracting. That could be for the prototype manufacturer, asking for references, asking for current customers. That's all important.
Okay, okay, great. So there's really quite a bit of business planning that needs to go on before really bringing the product forward. I mean, in order to figure out that costing and to figure out volumes, I mean, they would have had to figure out their marketing plan, what their distribution strategy is, in order to come up with a projection. So it's like, it can't just be, oh, I have my stuff, I'm ready to go, right? Because they won't be ready that way.
Yeah, and I remember being an entrepreneur and feeling like that was an insurmountable hurdle. It's like, I've got a great idea, I know it'll sell, and now you want me to somehow tie numbers to it and put a marketing plan together, and it just seems like a very daunting task.
Yeah.
And I think the more you get used to understanding and navigating through that world, it's really no big deal. And a secret that entrepreneurs can have that don't tell the manufacturers is those volume projections of how many units you're going to say that you need. It doesn't have to be true. It doesn't have to be, I mean, you want it accurate in order to weigh whether or not the manufacturer is capable, but it's not an obligation that you're saying, I will buy this many from you. You're basically saying, hey, if I needed to order 20,000 pieces a week, can you do it? And what would the price be? And then you can weigh multiple manufacturing quotes at that volume point without having to actually order that many.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, that makes sense. So how far can you go down that path where you can still go to them and say, oh, well, I know that I said I wanted 11,000, but now it's only 5,000. Can you do that? Like, how far can you go before it's like, hey, that's not okay, and you're locked in?
Every manufacturer knows that there's a ramp up. They call it a ramp. So you're gonna start from zero, and you're gonna go to whatever your high volume production rate is. And everybody understands that you will never get to that high volume manufacturing standpoint unless you fill in the rest of the ramp. So a small order that comes in is perfectly fine and will be expected by the manufacturer. So if you ask for 20,000 units a week quote and you only order 100, it's understood. Now you'll have to ask for the 100 part quote too.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean that you'll have to order all of the units that you asked for the quote amount for. Yeah.
Okay, so you can ask for less. You may pay more for them. Per
That's right.
unit.
Per unit, it will be
Yeah.
more expensive.
Okay.
It's very typical to ask a manufacturer to quote various volume levels. So give me a quote for 10 validation samples. Give me a quote for 100 pieces. Give me a quote for 10,000 and 100,000, or depending on the product.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here I have a question for you. So, in the development process, like for instance, in our class, Enterprise Launch, I mean, the students launch a product or service in a single semester, and so they have to go through their financial projections, and in order to do that, they need to contact manufacturers to find out, okay, when are they going to break into getting that volume discount or whatever, you know. So are manufacturers open to that kind of inquiry? Is there any kind of way to communicate it with them at that stage where you're like, I'm not quite there, but I'd like to be, and I'm working towards it?
Yeah.
You know, are they open to working with this?
Yeah, I think, you know, if it was me, I probably wouldn't be, you know, you only tell them as much as you need to get the information that you want. And, you know, if you've got a fully defined specification package that you can give the manufacturer, you ask for a quote, and they're very used to quoting. That's what they do every day, is they quote jobs. And so you don't need to tell them that you're in a class. You don't need to tell them that you're a high school student. You don't need to tell them any details other than, this is what I want to manufacture, how much will it cost?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, so it can sound really daunting, you know, and I've seen what happens with students sometimes is that they get their product launched, they go to the business plan and pitch competitions, they're on this high, and then it's like that's done, and now they're working towards this, you know, doing this really, you know, rubber meets the road type of work to really get this fully launched, you know. And is there any way to simplify that? Like, is there, you know, in the services that you offer, for instance, it's like, how do you, maybe you could describe more what you do specifically to,
yeah, I mean,
for people in that area.
there are, you know, I mean, there's a learning curve to everything we do in life, and there are people that are experts at what we're trying to learn what to do. Yeah. And so in many cases, whether it's buying a house or anything, hiring an expert that does that every day is of benefit. Now, it costs money. I mean, these are professionals that you know, it costs more money than figuring it out on your own. But it's a lot faster, and honestly, the risk is a lot lower in the end because you're using resources that have been refined over time. So the resources I'm talking about are people such as consultants that can come in and help advise how to step through these processes. Manufacturing liaisons, which is part of the service that my company provides, where we will help clients walk through every step of the process from, typically we get engaged after the prototype phase, okay, where people are trying to bridge that gap between, you know, maybe building 100 units to needing to build thousands, and understanding and working through that you know, that maze of how to do that. You know, otherwise, there are great startup resources in town. I mean, your class is one of them. There are great, you know, there are communities, many online actually in this town. I don't know if we're unique in that respect, but I feel like it's quite a lot of resources. And so it's going to those, you know, events and talking to people and maybe finding startups that have manufactured like products to yours and asking who they've worked with and what resources were valuable to them and those types of things. Yeah. So it's really, you really have to be, an entrepreneur takes a lot of outreach, a lot of extrovert type of skills in order to be successful oftentimes. It doesn't require it, but it helps. Yes,
yeah. I really like what you're saying about, you know, the network, the ecosystem. So we hear this entrepreneurial ecosystem that we have in our region is really amazing and so integral, because there's not, you know, things. I love what we do at City College, and when our students graduate, after they go to New Venture Challenge, after they're out, you know, from under our wing, it really requires the other organizations, you know, the impact work zones and people that offer the services that you do. It's like there needs to be a catchment, you know, on the other end to keep them moving forward. Yeah, and there are those resources. You mentioned the Impact Hub. They've got a lot of great resources. Yeah. There's the Sandbox, which is sort of a newer facility in town.
There's Startup SB, which is a good local community. There's 805 Startups, which I think is based more south of here in Ventura County, but it's still in the 805. So yeah, there are a lot of local resources.
And I really like this part of the conversation because it's really, success in entrepreneurship, we see it all the time. It's really about making those connections and really getting a good network where not only you connect with the people that you need, but you also become a connector yourself. It's stepping into that role. I think it's an important part of entrepreneurship. It's not just about creating cool stuff and making a change in the world, although that's pretty awesome, right?
Yeah, I must say that the startup community is a fantastic collaborative effort. And if you help somebody launch their company out of Santa Barbara, it just brings that much more buzz to Santa Barbara. Investors will be more interested in this area. I mean, we all win from companies being successful out of here. So it's really a collaborative experience. Unless you're competing directly with somebody, they're no doubt going to help you out. That's what I've seen. Yeah.
Yeah. It's awesome. We're lucky to be here. So continuing where we were going with an entrepreneur going through this process, say that now they have gone through the small run production, they've gotten good feedback from their target market. How do they know when they're ready to go to the next step? Like what kinds of signals will they get where it's like, oh, I need to be looking at larger production now?
Yeah, I think it comes down to orders, really. And ideally, you would develop your product, you'd have it refined, you'd get customer and market validation through sales, typically. And sometimes that comes through a successful Indiegogo or Kickstarter campaign. You get market validation, you get customer validation, and you get money. I mean, so those things are fantastic. But it's really bridging that gap from the short run to the production. And I'd say the biggest factor is orders. If your short run manufacturer can't fulfill the orders or the capacity just isn't there, or maybe the priority. Maybe you're just one of 10 jobs that they're working on and you say, hey, I need these immediately, and they just don't jump when you ask them to, then it's time to start looking elsewhere. Of course, the biggest motivator for going to a quote-unquote production facility is cost. Your costs will be much lower per unit, but that requires that you're buying a lot of them. Yeah. And so it will take a little bit of upfront investment into the production facility, primarily through tooling, depending on your product, but there are setup fees. But once those setup fees are taken care of, your per unit cost will be much lower in a traditional production facility than any startup facility.
Okay, yeah, so again, it comes back to, for the business owner, for the entrepreneur, it's so important to be monitoring their numbers, knowing what the capacity of their small run manufacturer is, so that they can anticipate, so that they don't run into a problem where they don't have product available and they're disappointing their customers because of it. Yeah,
I mean, what you may have to do is understanding your market and understanding where you need to target your price from a sales standpoint. And you may find that, hey, I'm not going to be profitable or very profitable with the short run prototyping that I'm doing, but at least I'm getting product to market and I'm getting sales and validating all of these things. But there may not be much profitability at all until you transition over to that production facility, and your cost could potentially go down by half. And then that's when you start making money. So your short run, early stage, your cost per unit might actually be quite high still. But that's okay as long as you have a plan to go to the next level. But understanding what that next level is, and maybe you think you'll get a 50% savings, but in actuality you won't. I mean, understanding those are important too. So getting quotes from high volume manufacturers once you feel like you have your part refined, even though you're not ready for that next step, is a smart idea, just to make sure you've got a path in front of you.
Yeah, and I imagine, angels and venture capitalists like to see, where's that break going to happen?
That's right.
And how's that going to?
It should be in your financial models for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've asked a lot of questions, and I have a feeling that there's some questions that all of you have. So why don't we turn the table here and see what questions we have in the room? We have some mic runners here. Yes? Yeah, Anthony.
As far as non-disclosure goes, if you're talking to all these different companies, is there an NDA that you advise going along with the emails, or how does that work?
Before you define your product to anybody outside of your company or yourself, you need to have an NDA in place. Absolutely. Yeah, without exception.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And we have Judith Schelling with us, our international intellectual property attorney that will be going into depth in that. So that'll be coming up too. Yeah. Hey, Doug.
What would you say is the advantage to made in USA versus manufacturing overseas? And what would be the cost differential doing the same product in the USA versus overseas?
So really the benefit of going overseas, and let's just talk China because it's the most common way of going overseas, but China makes sense from a small products that have a lot of labor involved, right? Because really the advantage China has is the labor rates are about 1/10 of ours. So what you're paying for $10 an hour here, you can pay $1 an hour, relatively. Now costs in China are going up, so that's not as, so that will change over time. But you're really paying for labor savings. The added costs are shipping. So depending on what your product is, if you can fit 100 of them in a box this big, then it's kind of a no-brainer, assuming there's a lot of labor content, that it's going to be a lot cheaper overseas. It could be 20% the cost overseas as it is here. If you're building vehicle hoods, like a hood for your car, there's no way it would make sense to manufacture that in Asia because you've got not much labor content, right? You got a big piece of machinery coming down and making the part essentially, and you have to ship it. So it would be more expensive overseas in that case. So you'd really be looking domestic, and so it's hard to have a broad statement, but labor's about 1/10 of the price. They also have a very good supply chain near factories in Southeast Asia, in certain portions of China specifically. And that's one of the motivators for Apple to build all their iPhones in southern China, is that the infrastructure is there. The parts are there, the suppliers are there, and even though Apple may be subcontracting the manufacture of the phone to a company called Foxconn, Foxconn has all their suppliers right next door too. So if they need something, they're literally next door or sometimes even embedded into the factory. So it's that infrastructure over there that is very efficient that we simply just don't have here. So it depends by product, but it's really labor content is the biggest. They can't buy, for instance, in China steel any cheaper than we can. They can't buy glass. They can't buy, these are global markets for materials. It's no cheaper over there than it is here. It's how they use them and how, the time spent to manufacture the product that's different.
Thank you.
I guess I also want to know about imports. So let's say we do it in China and it's small items and it's a small box. What are the costs associated with importing it, the product itself, how many can we bring into the country, all of that other part of bringing in from somewhere else?
Yeah, from a U.S. government standpoint, there are restrictions on some things that you can import. You have to have an import license for certain things, but for the vast majority, you don't. So things like alcohol, vehicles, those types of things, you have to have an import license. But for consumer products, typically you do not have to have an import license. You will be paying some tariffs at the border for customs and various things. You also have to pay freight to get them here. The most economical way to do that is to put them on a ship, right? You could theoretically buy a whole container, a 40-foot container, and fill it up with your product, and it takes a month to get here, but it's cheap per unit. The fastest way is by plane. You can basically get your product on a plane. It has to be in a smaller box and can't weigh too much, but you could have it here in 4 days. Essentially, is about as quick as that can happen. There are talks about the current administration passing something called a border assessment tax, which hasn't happened, but there are talks about it. And it's essentially to incentivize companies to buy more domestic product than overseas product. And my understanding of that is simply a company today that's buying their product overseas, the cost of the goods are foreign, can write off those expenses from a tax perspective. And so they don't have to, it goes against their income in their taxes. The border assessment tax legislation that is being proposed eliminates that. So essentially, if you're buying $1 million worth of product overseas, you could typically write that off as cost of goods in your taxes. That theoretically, you won't be able to do that from a U.S. perspective. Now, that legislation's having trouble getting through, and it hasn't happened yet. So as of right now, it's difficult to say if that'll change.
With the rising pressure on companies to be socially responsible and sustainable, how do you ensure that your manufacturers meet those ethical standards?
You really need to understand what sort of ethical standards you're referring to, or what is the priority. There are minimum standards that every reputable manufacturer anywhere in the world will conform to. Some countries are better than others. China is actually going through that right now. They've had good labor laws in place for quite a few years. As far as child labor and those types of things, that's been fine. But as far as environmental protection and their ability to manufacture products without polluting their environment has been a struggle. They're actually going through that right now. Costs we're seeing in China, like literally this month and last month and this year, have gone up substantially because of environmental regulations. They're literally shutting down factories that aren't conforming. So that's a great thing from an environmental perspective, and hopefully that proliferates. But we are seeing the cost world change a bit.
Great questions.
Hi. Is there any tax benefit in the R&D phase or early prototyping to doing it in the U.S. versus overseas when you look at R&D credits towards payroll tax or things along those lines?
R&D resources are taxed differently. I'm not a tax expert, so I don't feel comfortable commenting too much on that. But I think the tax law in general hasn't disincentivized U.S. manufacturers from going overseas for many years, and that's probably why it's becoming more of an issue today than it has been. But I can't comment specifically. I'm not quite sure. You'd have to talk to a tax attorney.
Thank you. Wow, Django, we're so lucky that you're here in this room, but we're also so lucky that you're providing the service that you do to our entrepreneurs. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. And I'll be around, so anybody come up and talk to me, get my card. So.
Hey, let's give a warm round of applause to Django. How are you guys doing? Good. So thanks again, Django. That was great. Yeah, so now you're kind of getting a taste of the strategy that we have here. We are having, well, they're not exactly TED Talks, they're 30 minutes, but they are kind of quick talks to give you an overview and then to have a Q&A session. And then our speakers, you'll find that a lot of them have handouts that'll allow you to do a deeper dive, and then it's the connections that you make here that will allow you to go deeper as well. For teachers, what we are doing is providing you frameworks like the slides that are available for your use, and all of the materials are available for your use. So that's what we have going for you. But I don't want to take any more time because it's time to welcome our next presenter to the podium. Lou Izzo he has a master's in organizational management from Antioch University and is a certified global business professional. He has decades of experience in manufacturing and business and product development for small engineering companies in various tech sectors, and has managed international business development in over 17 countries. He is currently the owner and senior consultant for Coherent Business Development Consulting in Santa Barbara, California, and is a small business development center consultant and a member of Tech Coast Angels. Please warmly welcome Lou Izzo.
Thank you. So we've gone through all of the stuff that Julie and Django have outlined. You'll hear some of these themes repeated, but now you've come to the point where you're at the top of the pyramid. You need to go into higher production to meet your demand. You want to have supply and demand balance. So does Apple, but they have trouble with that. So let's get into it. There's a lot of stuff to cover. Oh, I want to mention that we did get your registration questions, and we've looked through them, and a lot of your questions are going to be covered in this material. If we don't get to it, then please ask a question afterwards, and I will be at a table during the break as well. So, it's a process. To recap, you've got your prototype, you've done your short run, business-wise, you think you're ready to go into full-rate production. You've got to find a factory to do that. And once you have candidates that meet the criteria you're applying, you want to vet them. You want to make sure they're a good operation, they're going to meet your needs, and they're going to get you where you need to go. Then, as you start interacting with the factories, and this is going to be focused mainly on offshore, there are some things you need to be aware of as well. Then the bidding process, the all-important bidding process. I'll go over some tools and how to use them and how to manage that whole process so that you get good quotes back from your candidate factories. And then we'll talk about how you evaluate those quotes and make a decision on who to move forward with, and spend just a little time on getting to the pinnacle of that pyramid, the contract. So, there was a lot of talk and a lot of questions on offshore, onshore. Django gave you a great background on it, so I won't spend too much time here. But onshore, it's more expensive, especially at the higher runs. And there are other cost factors. You may need to interact with a domestic factory more so than you would on an offshore one. You might have to have talent in-house or contracted to handle that. And of course, you get the Buy American halo. If putting Made in America on your product and your promotional materials is important to your market and you, then you need to consider this. There is less IP risk using manufacturers here. Judith will get into more of that in the afternoon. And there are some recent developments. Django probably knows more about this, but there was a Brookings Institute researcher who put an article in Harvard Business Review saying that he's seeing trends from the makerspace movement, 3D printers and all the rest of that, bleeding out into larger and larger manufacturing enterprises. And he was saying that domestic manufacturing costs could go down. We'll see. So, offshore, and that's going to be the focus the rest of my talk here. Of course, you get lower cost. You've got to make sure you understand what that cost is when you get it into the U.S. That's called landed cost. Marketing concerns. Someone spoke to this point. Do you have to worry, or more importantly, do your customers have to worry about the reputation of the country you manufactured in terms of toxic products, how they treat their employees, et cetera, et cetera? It's a real concern, and it's more of a concern offshore, so it's something you need to be aware of. IP risk is higher offshore. Again, Judith will get into more of that. And of course, you have currency issues. If the dollar is up against the currency of the country you're manufacturing in, well, good for you. If it's down, you're going to take a hit. Okay, the first place to start, I guess maybe you can say Google might be the first place to start, but there's an awful lot of crap in Google, is referrals. And where do you get them? Well, you start with your networks. Django talked about the startup community here. It's broad and it's deep, and that's a good place to start. Places that you work with, schools you go to, Julie's class, Impact Hub, Sandbox, all of those places. Use your network, see if you can find somebody who's a couple steps ahead on that path than you are, and if they can refer you to something. Other startups, as I said, the people you're having a beer with on Friday and commiserating how your startup has taken over your entire life might be good places, good people to talk to, especially ones that have products that are similar to you or in the same market space. Advisor boards. By the time you get to this point, you've probably attracted some outside investment. And in order to do that, your pitch deck really should have an advisor board in it. Now, these aren't investors. They're people who have volunteered their time and, more importantly, their expertise to advise you to help you succeed. Some of them may have some expertise in manufacturing or know someone who does, so don't leave them out of this effort. And in a similar vein, your actual investors. And I'm thinking here more about angels because they're more involved with their it's their money, not a fund's money. Some of the angels that I work with, they take a very active role in helping the CEOs. And they may know of a good manufacturing operation offshore, or they may have another company that they've invested in that knows of one. So go there as well. Factory selection, there's a couple of things here. US-based contract manufacturers, I'm putting this in here in the interest of completeness. It's not what I think is a good way to go, primarily because these organizations, while they're based here, they have an operation offshore. They may even own it or have some sort of proprietary interest in it. And so that's all they're going to tell you about. So it's limited choices. When you go to buy a car, you may know the car you want, but you don't just go to one dealer. On the plus side, they do take care of all the interactions with the factory and do the soup to nuts thing that other organizations do. But if you want to go this route, you need to know a good price target. You have to have a vetted price target so you know whether their factory is giving you a fair and reasonable price. Then manufacturer's liaison, such as Django here. You get a wider selection of factories and countries to bid to. You get complete support from them. They usually have an in-country agent that can manage your business near the factory. And they have different business models that sometimes won't require you to fork up money up front for their services. They may get it on the backside as a commission from the factory. Okay, so you've got a list, you've got some referrals, you've got a list of factories that you think might work for you. How do you vet them? What kind of topics do you get into? And there are some handouts, don't read them yet, that give a list of questions that ask of factories. So we'll go over some of these here now. References. Those are distinct from referrals. They are customers of this factory that the factory decided to reveal to you. Talk to them. If you can get 3 each, that's great. Know these referrers, know what their relationship with the factory is, and ask questions. You know, have they held their prices? Do they meet their delivery commitments? How are they with some of the other contract terms? What's your best experience with them? What was your worst? You get the idea. And then talk to the factories themselves and look at what their current work is. Do they have any comparable products in production? Comparable meaning complexity, price, volume, the market. If they do, then you know they've got some familiarity with what you're going to be working with them, and it gives you another level of comfort. Quality assurance and manufacturing standards. This is a deep level here. I'm just going to give you a few of the alphabet soup things here and explain why they're important. Quality standards, ISO compliant, nearly all the factories you're going to talk to will be. It just says that there's an outside agency verifying that they are doing what they say they're going to do in running their company. Related to that are some of the manufacturing standards. Statistical process control, Six Sigma, 8D. I know Ray Bowman in the afternoon is going to get into some of this stuff. That's important to you because these processes help factories maintain a good yield rate, keep their rejects lower, keep their costs down. And if they're good at keeping their costs down, they're less likely to come at you down the road for a price increase. Contract and financial issues. See if you can get some data on how they perform on the delivery schedule. And also fair work processes, somebody asked about that. There are international standards that companies can say they sign up to that say they treat their employees well, they don't make them work 20 hours a day, the factory environment is safe and pleasant to work in. See what they say they live up to. And of course, the all-important non-compete, non-disclosure agreement conformance, make sure that they live up to it. I've got a client now who has that problem. He was producing a factory in China, and he found out they're starting to produce it and sell it in country. He's got a problem. And then company capitalization. Most people don't talk about this, probably because it's a very difficult thing to get at in an offshore company. But the issue here is, do they have access to adequate capital to be able to buy the material, buy the equipment, manufacture the tooling, hire the labor to keep your process going? And you can get a lot of this feel for when you visit, and you should visit, but don't ignore that. And then pricing concerns. Have a factory cost target in mind, but don't reveal it to them. You know, if you walk up to somebody at a counter in a store and say, how much is that? And the guy says, how much do you have? You don't think you're going to get the best price, right? A rule of thumb, and it's a very general one, the final retail price that you want to sell your product to should be 5 times the factory cost. This is just a ballpark for you to be aware of. You might not get there. So, okay, interacting with the factories. And again, Django can fill a lot of this in as well. Why visit? It is most important. It's a key to establishing relationship with the factory. It's best to visit with a local agent or a rep, so you have someone to hold your hand if you're new to offshore operations. And then language. It's not a problem. A lot of people are afraid of it. Most of these places, at least in China, are going to have technical English proficiency. You can use translators. Don't worry. Personal story here. This is almost 20 years ago. I was managing a program. I got a company into a medical device component. And it was to Baxter Healthcare. We sold to their contractor, who was Japanese, and their factory was in Thailand. And I had to manage the program for a few years. We got in trouble. I had to go to Chiang Mai in a meeting. This company, unlike most at that time, had promoted Thais to middle management. So I'm sitting in this conference room. There's upper-level Japanese managers. Their QA managers were all Japanese, but the production and other middle-level managers, including the purchasing people, were all Thai. My contact there was this woman in purchasing. I sat at this meeting and watched her cross-translate between Japanese, Thai, and English almost instantaneously. It was impressive. And you know what they say, what do you call an educated person from a developed country that only speaks one language? An American. Cultural issues are at the bottom of this. Be familiar with some of their local social and business activities. Examples, if you've got a meeting scheduled in Bangkok and everybody's an hour or two late, don't get upset. It's anticipated and it's okay. On the other hand, in China, don't you dare be late to that meeting. It's very important. They value patience. Don't get impatient with your representative. You could cause them to lose face, and then you've got a relationship issue. This all comes down to, in the rest of the world other than the US and Western Europe, they put more emphasis on a relationship than, or equal to the contract. I've been in business overseas, granted on the sales side, where we've had several meetings, dinner and stuff, where we don't even talk business. They just want to get to know you. It denotes respect. Americans that go over there and try and push to get down to business terms are not doing themselves any favors. Okay, RFQ, that's the big tool you need to get your operation running. It starts with a complete design documentation package, as Django and Julie were describing. It's got specific contract terms, payment terms, shipping destinations, delivery quantities, and you are going to ask for multiple delivery quotes. You'll get what's called stair-step pricing. So that amounts to a production forecast or a delivery forecast. Be careful here. Some companies will try and put contractually binding language against your forecast, such that there may be penalties beyond a higher price involved if you don't meet it. Don't go there. It's a new product. Ask for alternative bids. We'll get into that next. And then, for your benefit and theirs, provide evaluation criteria. Okay, that's how you're going to evaluate the bid you get back from them and from their competitors. Is price most important? Is quality above price? Where's delivery in that hierarchy? Give them some idea of what you really need. So, let's talk about alternate bids. Now, Django and Julie talked about how product development is inherently iterative, and you go loop, loop, loop through it. And you've gone through it, you've done the design for manufacturing with your short-run manufacturer here in the US, but you might get another answer from your offshore manufacturer. In general, I'd have to say California is an exception, but in general, there's a lot more manufacturing engineering talent in China than there is here. So if you just ask them or invite them, hey, if you see something, as they've been saying, you build it here, you use a engineered thermoplastic material that's common here, but your Chinese or Indian supplier says, hey, we can't get that here, or it's really expensive. How about this? And again, that can result in a lower price, but you have to make sure, first of all, you understand their changes. They should give you the same level of documentation back that you gave them, and make sure the changes meet your requirement. This goes back to market validation. If your market validation wasn't broad enough to allow for some differences in the product, then you might get a very attractive bid and have to go back and revalidate it, go through that loop again. So keep that in mind when you're doing that in the initial stages. All right, you've got some bids back. How do you understand them? Does it meet the RFQ requirements that you gave them? Ask questions, but do so carefully. They're going to know that it's a competitive bid, so there are other people out there. If you get questions or bid information back from one supplier, don't reveal that as you're asking questions of another one. You start to get near the area called auctioning, where you're setting one supplier against another. It may sound like a good idea, but you really erode trust, and that's what you're going to need in the long run. So evaluate the cost and risks of their bid. They're all going to be different. Look at the true cost of the bid for your planning. I mentioned landed cost. I won't get into Incoterms or all the rest of that stuff, but assume that you get the price is at the supplier's shipping dock. Well, you've got to add to that. You've got to add freight costs. You've got to add costs for customs broker or the freight forwarder that you're using. There may be tariffs coming from China. And maybe in other countries, such as India, there are no tariffs. So landed cost is how much you've paid to get that unit at a U.S. port of entry released by customs, and ready for you to put into your distribution channel. Other risks, maybe one of these bidders has got a little bit of a shaky reputation on delivery, but they're offering you a good price. Maybe in your vetting, you worry about some of their internal practices. This isn't a science, it's an art, but what you bounce that against is what's important to you. What are your criteria? And you need to be flexible on that. You can't always get what you want, but, and you know the rest. You have to work the trade-offs. You got one supplier that is offering you a great price, but he says, I can't meet your delivery. Or it's a great price, but I want payment in net 15, not net 30. So, again, if you know what's important to you going in, you can make a good decision at this point. Now, you've got a bid, you like the bid, you want to talk further and move towards a contract. This is another huge area. I'm just throwing this out as just a basic structure for how you're going to develop that contract. What goes into the final contract, first of all, is what was in the RFQ. A good RFQ has got most of the clauses of a contract in there. Of course, the customer is going to have to know what their costs are going to be so they know how to bid it. Then you get their bid, which is a little different from the RFQ. Always, they're going to take exceptions to something. And I'm talking about more minor things than a completely different design. Things like payment terms again. You ask net 45, they want net 30. So you like this supplier, you want to work with them, so you try and reconcile those differences through negotiations. You get into it, you go back and forth, and then you come to an agreement, and you document that agreement, and that goes into the final contract. Word of caution, don't try and do this yourself. You may not need a high-powered contract law attorney, but you may definitely need an experienced contracts management consultant, or if you've got the money, bring one in-house. National Contract Management Association is a good organization. They do certifications. Their people are usually pretty good. Okay, this was a set of best practices. Some of you are going, oh my God, this costs a lot of money. I don't have the people, I can't pay for consultants for all of this stuff. Okay. There are costs and benefits for each of these steps. Understand what they are and which ones are important to you and how you're operating. If you know what's important, you can skip, combine, or modify these steps in order to be the most effective and efficient in getting through this process. So you use it as a template for making decisions for your startup. Operative word, tailor. All right, so this is where we've been. This is the path, the journey, whatever you want to say. We went over factory selection, how you get find some to choose from, how you get references. We went through vetting, what kinds of things you want to ask, interacting with factories and why a visit is so important. I do have a handout for visiting factories that's out there, and how you run the bidding process and evaluate those bids and the contract. I also have a short handout on contracting. So, and the big handout is pretty much everything I've just spit out here, along with some of the graphics. Here is the reference on that article. It's interesting reading, if you can dig it up. And that's my email. If you have any questions after the event here today, just drop me a line. Okay, questions?
As far as it goes with the standard or the quality control with like foreign markets like China with like corruption and whatnot, does like the International Standards Organization or the American section of testing materials, do you need to find an outside company to test those products in those target?
Well, if they say they're ISO certified, that means that they've hired a consulting firm, an outside consulting firm to come back in and determine that. Really all it says is write down how you run your business, and then these people are going to come over here and audit you and make sure you're doing what you wrote that you were going to do, okay? The quality of what they're writing there can be of different levels. ASTM, any country who's made an economy out of servicing the American market is going to be pretty well versed in that kind of stuff. If you got the itchies about this particular one, then send it off to another testing lab. But this also brings up, maybe you've got a product that needs regulatory approval. You need UL certification or CE mark. Later this afternoon when Rob Herr from Fuelbox is here, you can ask him about that. Some companies will say that they're certified. Now, all of these certifications and stuff goes into their overhead, which goes into the price to you. If you're just making a cloth toy for kids, you don't need these guys. I hope I answered your question there.
How do you handle conflicts of interest with your on-site agent? I think you mentioned that they either get paid by you up front or they're on commission by the factory.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's kind of a similar thing when you've got sales reps. You want to look at their list of principals to see if they doing any work with anybody else. You got to do your due diligence. If this agent is affiliated with somebody in the States, such as Django, you go to him and ask him questions, and he's responsible for their conduct. But the risk behind a bad agent can go anywhere. It can go into IP, all sorts of places. It's, again, referrals, references, do your due diligence.
So you mentioned non-compete. If you're doing international manufacturing, is there really any control that you have of them making a product and selling it somewhere else? And if not, what do you do, and is it even worth trying?
It is very difficult. I mean, we've all been talking about China. If you don't have a Chinese patent, where's your lever? Even if you do, you're going to go into the Chinese courts and try and defend it. So as far as the business risk that is entailed there, if they're selling it in China and you don't believe you have a market in China, then don't worry about it. In fact, I've heard of some companies that will say, I'm not going to sell in China. If you want to take some of this and sell it in China, fine, but in exchange, you're going to hang on to my proprietary information and you're not going to give it to anybody else. You're not going to ship it offshore to compete with me. Now, the Chinese have some regulations about if you're building it within China, selling it within China. I think there's a lot of fees and duties. Sometimes they'll ship it offshore and then back in. I'm not all that versed. It's quite a thicket, but you don't have a lot of recourse.
Just curious on the rule of thumb, the 5-time markup. Is that markup on cost per unit, or is that cost per unit after land-in costs?
Cost per unit, factory cost. And that's really kind of I don't want to mislead anybody here. That's more typical for consumer products where there's a lot of markup along the way. You got to pay your distributor and your wholesaler and your retailer and stuff, so that's where you need a lot of that stuff. But it's just, I wanted to give people something to have in mind and shoot at.
So I'm wondering, what trends should we be keeping our eyes on in terms of countries that are upcoming, that are they're getting their manufacturing together and could be, another thing to consider besides China? Is there anything going on that way that we should be aware of?
Yeah, and Django can chime in on this, but there's all through Southeast Asia, there's Vietnam, there's the Philippines. I've got a client who's moving his production from China to India because he got a bid that's like half the price of what he's getting from his Chinese supplier. Now, I'm working with him. I said, yeah, India is a whole nother game. I did a lot of selling into India, and it's, their respect for regulations sometimes are not as good as other places, but their labor costs are lower. As Django said, China's is starting to creep up. That's the global cycle. As an economy generates more middle-class people, the wages go up. But I'm just now getting into some research on India, so that might be one to watch. One good thing from them, there's no tariffs on their stuff coming from India.
Mm-hmm. What's the best way to build tolerances and penalties or performance pay with the manufacturer, or is it just you hold the line, it's good or bad? Is there a certain amount of rejection you should accept to be a good partner? Is there any good rules of thumb there?
Well, again, on the quality level, you might want to ask them what their AQL is when they do their outgoing inspection. That's acceptable quality level. It's how many parts do they inspect per lot. You can specify what you want them to use, and that can reduce the incidence of rejection. All the rejection that happens in-house on their shop floor, that's their problem until the cost gets so high that they want to raise their price to you. What you get here, you can put language in a contract saying, if we find rejects or our customers find rejects, we're going to ding you X amount for everyone that is your problem. Contracts in lots of industries have got reject penalties. So how complicated is your product? What are the consequences of a failure? I negotiated a contract for some components going into the 787-9, and in that industry, you screw up, and it's an aircraft on ground, you could lose your whole company. So it depends on the market and the value of the product. Thank you.
In our model, we went through the manufacturing phases, and now we're looking at some other things in the context of manufacturing that impact it. And there were a lot of questions, or several, that came up around intellectual property. So that's what we are going to address right now. And I don't think there's any better person that we could have do this than Judith Schelling. She's on our faculty at Santa Barbara City College, and she works with our entrepreneurs, so I see her in action. And her background is awesome. She's a registered U.S. patent attorney who has provided intellectual property support services to businesses, academic organizations, and public entities since 2001. Judith's consulting practice focuses on helping small and medium-sized enterprises to identify, develop, protect, and maintain their intellectual property in a manner that is effective, sustainable, and aligned with their business goals. Judith's specialties include chemicals, pharmaceuticals, nanotechnologies, clean technologies, and both electronic and medical devices. Please, a warm welcome for Judith Schelling.
Okay, so the first question is, what is intellectual property? That's what I want to go over. I'll use this, it's fine, thanks. How to avoid IP theft during manufacturing generally, and then how to avoid it as you scale up production, so from a startup to move up to scale. What is property? I just want to, everyone has this idea intellectual property is some magical thing. It's just a type of property. It's something that belongs to you if you own it and you created it, essentially. There's three types of property. Real property, we all know about: houses, buildings. Chattels are personal property, your iPhones, which everybody's looking at, your laptops. And then there's intellectual property, which is creations of the mind, okay? In general, when you own property, it means you have the right to use it, the right to sell it, the right to enjoy it, the right to rent it, and the right to stop anyone else on earth from using it if you want to. It's just usually easy to figure out when you're talking about a house or a laptop. It's easy because it's a tangible thing. So you sell it to somebody, they can see it, you can price it, everything like that. Intellectual property, on the other hand, is an intangible type of property. It's not something you can touch, feel, or hold. So the boundaries of your ownership are legally defined rather than physically defined. That's what all this stuff on that slide means. Okay, so the intellectual property is owned by the person initially who created it, but you can also sell it, barter it, use it for leverage, whatever you want to do, just like any other kind of property. It's often jointly owned when it's creative, so watch out for that if you have a co-creator. There are laws that dictate how you obtain intellectual property and what, how you do it. There are certain ways you have to. For instance, if you want to get a patent, you should file that application for a patent before you present that patentable invention or idea to anyone outside your company. And that includes your parents, your mothers, your boyfriends, girlfriends, whatever, anybody outside your company. If you do that, this is just an example. Say you had I don't know, some kind of new pen that wrote all over the place, some kind of unique thing, and you just showed it to somebody or showed it at a thing like this, that's enough to wipe out your ability to patent it anywhere else in the world, virtually except the US. So you've just wiped out a European market, any other market you were thinking about. So be careful how you disclose it. And you can disclose it certain ways, we'll talk about that protects you from that kind of loss. So just make sure you understand the rules of this game, because they're pretty tight for getting intellectual property. And again, when you get that kind of property, you have the same rights as any other kind of property, stopping other people from using it. You can let them use it in certain ways by licensing it, various ways. I'm going to be here during most of the lunch period, or we have a time period there in between the next break. So please feel free to come and ask me questions. And there's a handout about intellectual property I had that gets you through the different types, as well as some sources where you can go look up some of this stuff and figure it out on your own. Okay, so intellectual property types and protection. These are the main four: copyrights, trade secrets, trademarks, and patents on the left side. On the right-hand side is how do you get them, and then once you get them, how do you enhance legal protection? This is a quick overview. Again, look at the resources I gave you. For copyrights, you get it as soon as you create it, but you get better protection if you register it with the government. With trade secrets, you just keep it secret, as long as you keep it secret. And the length of protection varies with each type as well. To get a trademark, you have to use it in commercial use, so that's like an Apple logo. Don't use apples, they'll sue you. Make up your own. But you get it as soon as you use it in commerce, but you get much stronger protection if you register it. You don't have to, but you get better protection. With patents, you have to timely submit an application. So generally, that's within 1 year of making, using, selling, or offering to sell it, typically. Okay? So be careful about that. And again, I can give you details or more information about this in person at the table. I don't have time to cover it. That's not the focus of this talk. So what of your business assets? Do I care about this? Do I have any intellectual property? Pretty much every business has intellectual property. Okay, literary works include marketing materials, photographs, that's copyright. Brand names, product names are typically trademarks. Confidential information like your client list or marketing strategy should be trade secrets. Products with new designs could be a design patent. Products with new functionalities or utility could be a utility patent. And plant products, if you have one. I don't do many of those. They're not very common, but you can actually, some types of plants you can patent as well. Plant products. All right, so let's go back to the focus of this, the ways to avoid IP theft during manufacturing. I think these are four of the biggest ones, and again, the speakers this morning were great. They've already touched on a lot of this. Know your supply chain is a big one. They should be reputable, and you should know, have some kind of really good relationship with them. If you can manufacture in-house, that's always the safest way, because then you don't have to farm out your secret information or intellectual property to someone else. Not always possible, but good if you can. I think the main thing for me is stay as close to home whenever possible. And the speakers this morning gave you lots of other good reasons to do that, especially when you're starting out. I would suggest that you don't, if you can possible, don't outsource your entire manufacturing process. And I'll go into a little bit more detail of these points in a minute. And then use all the legal protections you have or can get when you're working with manufacturers, okay? So the first one is know your supply chain. You should have a way for approving suppliers. Again, the people who talked to you this morning know more about this than I do. And they went over it in some depth. Make sure you vet people, you get referred, you feel comfortable working with them. You may have to check their suppliers as well, which is something people sometimes don't do. So all the way down the supply chain, you should be pretty comfortable with who you're working with. The second one is to manufacture in-house. If you can, use lean manufacturing techniques. Just try to keep it in-house if you can, on a cost, if you can do it cost-wise. If you have to outsource some parts of your process, as they said this morning, try to work with local companies, and they gave other reasons for doing this, but for protecting your IP, it's also important. Try to work with people you know and people who are local. It always helps. As you get further afield, the reason legally to do that is you're getting outside the scope of U.S. laws. Okay, and then you have to take into account the foreign laws. That gets a little bit more complicated. Okay, my suggestion is, if possible, don't outsource your entire manufacturing process, and these are meant as notes. Try to avoid giving your entire invention over to one person or one company, in this case a manufacturer. If you can, split it up into different things so not one company has the whole concept. Another way you can approach that is the next point. If you have a key thing in your, like say you have a cell phone device with a key kind of display, try and make that display part in-house so that nobody gets their hands on how you make that key element, and they manufacture other things overseas. So there's different ways you can strategize to do this. Be careful outsourcing to China. It is getting better, but it's still tough in some respects. To give you an idea, the magnitude, intellectual property theft costs America up to about $600 billion a year, and China accounts for most of that loss. Okay, so listen to these people who talked this morning when you're working with these guys and take their advice to heart, because it's very good advice, all right? It's a great place to manufacture if you can get everything worked out, though. Okay, the last one was use all the protections you have or can get. So again, we're looking at trademarks, trade secrets, copyright, and patents primarily. Try to protect as much as you can. Sometimes this is a cost issue, especially for startups. Patents are expensive, so try and find another way. Sometimes patents are the best way. If your company doesn't have a patent or anything patentable, it doesn't mean you're not a good company. It just means you don't have anything patentable. Lots of companies are doing really well without patents, okay? And then if you can't cover it with intellectual property, and even if you can, you should embed that in your contracts. So your contracts, make sure your contracts with the manufacturers cover all the elements you want to cover and all the things you want to protect, okay? A contract is basically a legal document between parties that clearly spells out what's expected and required of each party. I absolutely believe in contracts. I think even if you're doing work with your mother or your boyfriend or your brother, you should write it down. And Lou's laughing, they're all laughing. But families fight, and things go wrong. So write it down exactly what you expect and what who you're working with expects. Okay, so everybody knows what's expected of them. You're not trying to screw somebody by writing a contract. You're trying to clarify what it is you want to work on together and how you want to do that, okay? Examples of contracts are non-disclosure agreements, which were mentioned again this morning, work for hire agreements, independent contractor agreements, and NNN agreements, which I'll talk about a little bit. These are, to me, the big four for most companies, especially smaller companies. Okay, let's talk about the 3 phases now. I've broken it down into the 3 phases, which is roughly what people were talking about this morning. The first phase is protection for a startup company. So now you're a startup company, you might be in Julie's class, you have no money, you're trying to figure all this stuff out, and you're trying to move forward as best you can. These are things you can do here that are relatively inexpensive, and I've got them in order of probably what's important for most companies. Make sure you put a copyright notice on all written materials, just like this down at the bottom. Everything should have that copyright notice on it. If you don't know how to do it, just open up any book and look at the copyright notice and copy it, okay? Put your name on there. Here I have the little C mark, the year, and my name, or that could be your company name, okay? If you have a company name that you're using that you want to use as a trademark, in this case it's a service mark because I consult, so service marks are just trademarks for services. You should put this little TM superscript up in the right-hand side. As soon as you start using that in commerce, you have legal protection for that name. Make sure you search really well first, though, to make sure no one else is using that name, okay? But you can use that, it doesn't cost you anything. And then write down the date. Oh, I forgot to bring my little book. Here it is. Write down the date. You should keep all these important dates in a bound notebook. This is what most of my students use because it's cheap and it's bound. There's legal reasons why you want a bound notebook. If you want to ask me questions about notebooks, you can ask me later today when I'm just at the table. If you have any trade secrets, you should label them all. You don't have to put trade secrets. You can put confidential. Anything that should remain confidential should be labeled as such and stored in a way that they're not readily accessible. Use non-disclosure agreements using market validation during market validation interviews. Remember what I said, if any time you present your stuff to the public, your invention or your idea, then that's a public use, okay? And that starts the clock ticking for patents. If it's a trade secret, you just lost it. So the way you don't lose it is you make the person sign a non-disclosure agreement, which just means they won't disclose that information to anyone else, okay? It's also called a confidentiality agreement, same thing. You want them not to spread the word, okay? You want them to keep it confidential. And then if you have a patentable subject matter, design, or utility, you should really file a provisional patent application. But again, even when you do that, it starts the clock ticking. So you only have 12 months to file a real patent. To file a provisional patent application costs you about $65 if you do it yourself. And please have somebody knowledgeable look it over at least before you file it. But then 12 months down the road, you're looking at typically anywhere between $5,000 and $12,000 to write a real patent. And that's not the end of the game, that's just to write it and file it. So it's an expensive business, okay? But you start the clock ticking, you have to do it within 12 months. All right. And I can give you some more details about this if you ask me offline. Okay, so that's phase 1. And most people in phase 1 try to do all of those things. In phase 2, you've now got a good prototype, so we've gone past the cardboard box stage. And you need to manufacture a small run of product with a local designer, ideally, as we said earlier, in order to get more additional market validation and feedback. At this point, you want what's called an independent contractor agreement. And so this agreement, you're going to work with someone who's not part of your company. They're usually an engineer, designer, tooler, somebody. Make sure that in that contractor agreement you have terms for confidentiality, which is your non-disclosure agreement. That you require, also make sure that you require that independent contractor to sign over any rights to any IP they generate to you. And also, after that time, to help you get it later on, okay? Because if they change your design and somehow contribute, let's say it's can again somehow contribute or change the design, they become an inventor. They are now a co-owner in that invention. And they have to be on all the patents, or else your patent will get invalidated. That's the first thing we do when we go to court, is find some inventor that's not really an inventor, or one that's missing, and you're done. Okay? So you want them to, they're still going to be inventor, but they should assign the rights to you legally, so you own it, so they sell the rights to you. And then they also agree to help you get that patent, because they still have to sign and do things down the road. Okay, because they're still an inventor. Similarly, work for hire agreements, if you have any copyrightable material, this is typically if you hire somebody to do photographs or website designs or something like that, they own the copyright as soon as they make it. So you have to make sure they don't, again, non-disclosure, and then also that they assign those rights to you. So for a work for hire, if you do it properly, they don't have to assign the rights, you own them right off. That's only for copyright. And then don't forget about all the other things, trademarks, trade secrets, because as you're growing, new things come up, so make sure you keep on top of those things. It's what we call mining. That used to be my job at DuPont. I just went around to all of the engineers and tried to figure out what they were doing that was IP, so that we kept on top of that. Okay, the phase 3 protection. This is when you now have a final design, for example, roughly, and you want to manufacture on a larger scale, including offshore. This is where I think you want to have these, what's called an NNN agreement. So that's non-disclosure, which is confidentiality. Non-use, that prevents the manufacturer from using the technology for themselves. And non-circumvention is something people forget about. It's particularly important, I think, in China, that if it gets disclosed to a third party, you have some way of getting to that third party, because then they can disclose it. It's called circumventing. I'm going around the manufacturer, and now this guy, this third party, didn't sign anything, so how do you bind them, okay? It's really important. So I would have at least those 3 things in there. I also think it's really important that, and again, the speakers this morning, which were great, touched on some of this. If you're using manufacturers overseas, the contracts, I think, should be written or at least translated into the local language. They should be sensitive to cultural and business norms in that country, and they should be enforceable under local laws. This typically means having someone over there working on the contracts, okay? So you can't take your NDA and go to China, okay? It's only good under US law, okay? So be careful when you're in another country, you're under a different legal system, all right? So be careful how it's, and it should be, yeah, and it should be litigated under there if you can. That being said, China's getting better. It's still not great, but I work for a law firm as well, and they have had quite a bit of success over there recently, litigating cases in China, so that's kind of hopeful. Take-home messages, be careful when and how you disclose your intellectual property. That's a big thing. And who you disclose it to, especially before you've got legal protection for it. Also make sure you protect your IP when you're working with manufacturers or anyone outside your business by using legal agreements that are tailored to meet the needs of your particular business. They should cover all those non-compete, non-use, non-circumvention, but they should also be tailored to whatever other things your particular business needs to protect its commercial viability. Thank you. It's a lot in a short pace of time, but thanks. I'm happy to answer questions. I think I have 7 minutes.
How do you justify during the customer validation stage getting NDAs from everyone you talk to? Which is what I thought I heard you say, to get an NDA whenever you disclose your idea.
Typically, when people use those, they're like in Julie's class or in, they're doing the first stages with the NDA, so they're showing it to their mother, they're showing it to their fellow surfer friends. Most people don't care, they'll just sign it. The big thing is when you get higher up, of course, the investors don't always want to sign it for sometimes very good reasons. But I'm talking about the early stages where they don't have a patent, they don't have any money, they may, they want to just get some kind of idea if it's even worth doing.
I don't think you can do customer validation with having everybody sign an NDA. Like you're validating at the beach or with oil slick thing. You didn't go out and ask everybody to sign an NDA before you showed them the product. So I'm struggling with how you justify.
Well, in the case of John's oil slick, which we're talking, it's a beach tar remover, he's got a secret formula, so you can also just not give away the secret parts. I mean, you don't always have to give away. I was thinking more if you've got some kind of mechanical thing where people can actually see how it works. That's a really good question, because if there's something secret about it, you don't have to give away everything with an NDA. You can just, you're only going to use an NDA to cover the things that are essential to the thing that you have to give to someone in order for them to assess it. Does that answer your question?
No.
Okay. I'm not talking about a huge, long document. I'm talking about a few sentences that says, I'm not going to do it.
I guess what I'm thinking of, with a lot of the startups, they'll go to validate, they'll walk out into the street and say, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. How do you like it? What we paid for it?
How do you then, I mean, giving everybody you want feedback from an NDA seems impractical. If you don't do that, can you still protect yourself?
You can patent it before you do that. If it's a patentable thing, you can patent it, then you can talk about it all you like. It doesn't really matter. The best thing to do is get the protection up front, and then you can go talk to whoever you want. The NDA is only to keep it from being that first public use before these clocks start ticking. And it's also a business decision. If you don't have anything patentable and you're just going to take the risk, then take the risk. I'm just saying if you have something, especially if it's a patentable thing and you haven't filed a provisional or something to cover it yet, then if you expose it to the public, literally, let's say it's a medical device, it would be all your Germany, everywhere else would be done. I mean, you can't file there. And you can argue, yes, no one's ever going to know about that public disclosure, but do you really want to go litigate that? I don't think so. Right? You just don't want to avoid litigation, which is so costly. But you're right, it's not always totally feasible. This is just what I recommend. Okay? It's a good question, thank you. There was another question.
How do I protect my software application that I just wrote?
The code is protectable by copyright. That's probably the best way, and it's certainly the cheapest way. If you have something, we can talk about that offline, but sometimes it might be patentable depending on what the app does. But certainly you've got copyright, and that's in the code.
Thank you.
As soon as you write it, you've got it. Yeah. Hello? Yes?
Yeah. So, two questions. First one is the added, say the manufacturer, added inventor. Do you put that, and the selling the rights to that, do you put that in which part of the contract, not the non-disclosure, but the non-use?
Do you mean selling the rights to someone?
Yeah, so say if you go to your manufacturer and they change it slightly, and where in the contract or what kind of language do you use for that? And then the second one...
Oh, because you want to buy their rights? Is that the...
Yeah,
you want the rights.
So at what point do you bring up that you want to buy their rights? Or...
You do that in the contract up front before they even make anything for you.
Okay.
So they just agree to assign those rights. You're going to have to leverage because they might want something for that.
Right.
Okay, but I think you need to have it up front because otherwise it becomes a major issue later. If they're an inventor and they decide... intellectual property like patents are joint and severably owned. That means if you and I own something together, I can go out and license it to whoever I want without you saying anything. That's what you want to avoid. You want to have control of it. So do that up front before they do anything for you. And there's lots of contracts out there. You can get boilerplate ones to start with. I mean, if you're working with a big manufacturer, you should have an attorney doing this with you. But what I want you to do is be aware that you need to think about that ahead of time, not do it yourself.
And then the second question was actually the boilerplate template for, is there any kind of resources for like a template for the non-disclosure agreements or anything that you recommend?
Yes, Nolo, I recommend Nolo. Nolo Publishing does a lot of self-help things, and if you're a startup, you can buy their form. Actually, it's on my resource page there. I put forms, and I'm not telling you, you really should have an attorney look at it, but it's a good place to start and get it banged out, and you think about what you got to do. Because when you go to an attorney, you pay by the every 10 minutes. Okay, so you want to know what you want up front, and then you can get a really good bang for the buck when you work with an attorney.
Thank
Okay?
you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. That's yes? Over here?
How do you go about the example where a person has a patentable idea, you know, at the very early stage of a startup, and then you're going to form it with somebody else, you know, and the company's 50-50, but how do you have that conversation, because the patent is yours, right? So how do you, you know, formulate that so the two partners, for example, are equally sharing, or at least have the conversation in a logical way up front so that that doesn't become a problem, you know, months or a year down the line?
I would recommend that you form the company and assign the patent to the company, so then you share ownership in the company and its assets. Now, some of the other business people here might have other ideas how to do that. But if I understand your question, it's that, you know, you're asking someone else to put their time or money into your company, and yet you own the patent. Yeah, I would just assign it to the company, and then it's a company asset. Oh, you sign it. You just get an assignment agreement and you sign it. You assign it to the company, and then I assume you both own shares or whatever it is in the company, right? That's the best way to do it, I think. That's what I tell most of my clients to do. Just assign it to the company, and then when someone has an interest in the company, they have an interest in that asset as well. I think I'm probably done. 30 seconds, unless someone's quick. Yes?
When you have a startup situation, how do you justify the cost of a patent versus the cost of just staying afloat in the beginning?
You can't. It's a business decision. Like I'm saying, you can get a provisional patent for about $65. You can probably get somebody to help you with that for, I usually spend about 3 hours on them. So that's anywhere from, for me, that's about $1,000. And if that's too much, then try and find somebody cheaper. Or I just recommend you have somebody at least look at it and flesh it out for you for a lot of reasons, because that provisional is cheap, but it has to be done right. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Judith, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That's fabulous. Yeah. Okay. Ready for another one before lunch? Let's do it. It's because we don't want to miss this one. So, okay, so let me ask you this. If you, so say I'm interested in running a marathon, would I go and seek advice from a professional athlete, or like a, I don't know, somebody that just likes to kind of stay in shape? What's that? Athlete. Okay, so it's kind of similar here. We have our next speaker who works in the fashion industry. And if you think about the fashion industry and the challenges that they face, you know, so they have, you know, lines that come out every season. They have multiple things that they're producing in each line, rather than just a single item or a few items, you know. And so it's kind of like, if we look at the professional athletes, we can learn a lot about other businesses that maybe aren't manufacturing as much. And so I am really excited to welcome to the stage Frances Harder. She is an author and a fashion industry expert and an educator who's published a series of books on starting a fashion business. She was the founder and president of FBI, oh, it's not what you're thinking, Fashion Business Incorporated from 1999 to 2017, an educational 501c3 which provided vital business development and certified job retraining programs. She is a United Nations consultant for small businesses, producing alpaca products in Peru and cashmere products in Nepal. Additionally, she consults and speaks internationally on product development, branding, merchandising, production, and entering the U.S. market. She has fashionforprofit.com, and she has a few things to share with us today about how to fund your manufacturing. Please welcome Frances.
Well, I always say I'm the designer gone insane, because basically I trained as a designer in England, and after many years of being in the industry, realized, and also as a professor at Otis College of Art and Design before that at FIDM, that the colleges were not giving the business development that students needed in order for them to be successful entrepreneurs. So having a great idea is one thing, but making it so that it's a profitable idea is a whole different thing. And you've had exposure to this morning to some wonderful speakers giving you lots of ideas, and it's very confusing in the apparel industry because it's not just about the widget. You're not inventing one thing, you're inventing 5 lines a year, as Julie was saying, and one thing goes wrong, your fabric comes in the wrong width and the production gets screwed up, then you're automatically thrown for a loop, and all the money time that you've put into it can sometimes be lost. So I'm coming from this from the perspective of the apparel industry, which probably is one of the most brutal of all industries. So talking about funding is obviously, for anybody starting a business, something that you have to consider, because you can't start a business without money. So where is your money coming from? So let's get started and talk about some of these things. I think it's just this flicker, right? Yeah. Okay. So where is your money coming from when you start your own business? And I have people who come and go, oh, I've got all these great ideas and I'm going to find an investor. Well, it doesn't happen like that, because people, when you're looking for money, it's about you. They're investing in you. And if they feel that you're not experienced, you don't have the background, you don't have the connections, then it's going to be very difficult to get the investments that you need. So when you're starting out, where is your money coming from and how much do you need? And as somebody said earlier on, I think it was this gentleman here, you know, you don't know. It's a guessing game, but you have to start somewhere. And one of the biggest overwhelming tasks for a new company is putting a business plan together. However, I would suggest that for those of you who are beginning, begin with an investment deck. And it's like a PowerPoint. You answer the questions very briefly that then can go into a full business plan. So where does your money come from when you're starting out? Do you have money? And people, you know, are they just going to invest because you have an idea? No. They want to make money too. So it's important that you have some skin in the game. Where does your money come from? Is it coming from bank loans, your savings? Do you have a home that you're willing to take out a loan against so that you can use that money? I've had people that I've been talking to say, oh, I've got a home, but I don't want to risk my home. But you're willing to risk other people's money when you're borrowing it. So they want to see that you are actually seriously involved in this and that you're willing to put skin in the game so that you can then show that you are so driven and that you're already putting your own money in it, and maybe you've got some friends who can also invest. Credit cards is a good way to go as well, but you've got to be able to pay it back immediately, otherwise you're paying interest rates on it. So where does your money come from? That's your first, you've got an idea. Now you have to figure out where does your money come from. So, of course, when you're putting your own money in it, the high risk is personal risk, and you might lose your home. So are you that convinced that you can make money from this? The best thing is to maybe get some small investments, get it going, do it domestically, don't even think about going offshore yet. You have, as this gentleman also said, all those points are absolutely true. When you're beginning, your numbers are going to be small. So you probably will be thinking about producing domestically, where you can control it. You're going to be doing your product development also domestically. And so you won't be going to those large numbers where you'll be going offshore. So the downside, of course, is the investors, being you, have got skin in the game. So where else can you go for money? Friends and families. I usually say 3 Fs. We've got friends, family, and fools investing in new companies. So you have to find out which one is the one that's going to invest in you. Do you have a wealthy family member? Do you have a friend who's willing to invest? Make sure, and I think the lady, the attorney was talking about it, anybody you go into business with, particularly partners and friends and families, is very, very dodgy, because you can, that's an English word, sorry, but you can, you can fall out. I had a good friend I went into business with, and we had a line of lingerie. We took it to New York, and I was the designer. I thought, I'm the designer, she's doing the business side, and she wrote the business plan. We came back from New York. We sold $250,000 in 3 days. That was a good sell. We're flying back feeling absolutely high as a kite, and I looked at the business plan, and she's got herself written down for twice my salary. So I was like, well, where does that come from? She said, well, everybody knows that merchandisers earn more money. So I said, well, not really. When I'm putting 50% of my skin in the game, no, it's not. So what do? And I decided to walk away, because I felt that this relationship, right in the start, she was ready to screw me over. We're still friends, actually. But you know, you've really got to know who you're going into business with. And it's my fault that we didn't sit down with a glass of wine and go through the points. I'm willing to put this in. You're willing to put this in. I'm the creator, the designer. You're the business financial person. One word of warning. Please don't have 2 designers going into business. It's insanity. Okay, make sure you've got the right partners for your product. So finding somebody that you can partner with, who maybe's got some money that can put in, you match your monies, sit down and have an agreement with them and know exactly who's doing what. Otherwise, it will be disastrous for a friendship. So make sure, or family, friends. So make sure that you are familiar with what you're asking them to do and what you're going to be prepared to do for the business as well. So what is the upside? Strong support for your idea, of course. You're getting the accolades that you need in order for you to get stronger to go forward. And negotiating terms, of course, with your friends and your family. So where else? Microloan programs, there are available. It depends, again, on what your product's going to be. In the clothing industry, getting microloans is very difficult. By the way, I should ask you, how many of you in here are thinking of doing sewn products or accessories? Okay, we have one lady here, 2, 3. Okay, when you're doing accessories and anything to do with sewn products, it's very much more confusing and more difficult for you to handle. So the more education you have, the more networking, the strength of the people around you will really help you. And I think this other gentleman, he also touched on that. The whole business side is about networking, meeting the people that you feel comfortable with that will not screw you over. By the way, there's a lot of screw over in all businesses. So making sure that you have the right connections, that you feel confident with the people that you're working with, that you have a good understanding is really, really important. So finding somewhere where you can get maybe a short-term loan for your products, where you can go. And I know that in Santa Barbara, Ray will be talking later on, you have a lot of good support here who can help you grow your company, which is really, really crucial for you to have that network available. So who's going to get the microloan? Okay, so you're self-employed, probably, when you're doing this, and you're a new startup, small businesses with few employees. So these are possibilities for you. You can go out and maybe talk to the bank, see if there's anything available. How many of you are women-owned businesses? Only 1, 2, 3, okay. You should also register with the SBA as a minority-owned business. Women and minorities can register as a minority business. You can go to their website, and it's a really good way for you to, once you're registered, there is money and funding available for minorities, special amounts of money that might help you just kickstart your business to get it going. And it's worth it, particularly in the clothing industry, because there are contracts there from bigger department stores who are pledged to work with minority-owned companies. So I can tell you more about that later on. Okay, so the downside is higher interest rates, and the upside, generally easier to qualify for these bank loans. Microloans are typically available for up to $50,000. So again, know what you're going to use this money for is really crucial. So all this funding thing is available, but you really need to know before you go out and start talking to anybody exactly what it is that you want to ask for. How many of you know your bank managers? Good. Go and see your bank manager. Sit down. They've got a wealth of information. If they believe in you, they can help you. So go out, talk to your bank manager, see where they can help you and where they would suggest you go to get the funding you need. So startup contests, I know that we talked about that with Julia, and I'm not familiar that much with it, but I know that they have quite some good programs here. And Julia can tell you a little bit about that. I know in LA, we don't necessarily have any of those. Maybe Ray knows about that, but I don't know of any for the apparel industry that would be available for startup companies. So what are the downsides? Obviously, you've got to prepare for all this, know your pitch, go out and spend time meeting these people, which you never know. Maybe you come home disappointed, but that person that you met a year ago suddenly turns around and comes back to you. So all this, and this is something I've learned from starting my nonprofit in 1999, after coming out of the classroom and teaching for all these years and having my own business, is about honestly getting out and meeting people. You never know where these people and connections and networks will lead you. So I think it's tough to make yourself go out and meet people, but it opens up doors. And that networking is crucial for you to grow a business. Okay, crowdfunding. How many of you tried this? Were you successful? Yes, you did. You said you got how much?
13,500.
Which platform was it on?
I did on Indiegogo.
Very good. Anybody else done any crowdfunding? How much did you get? 500,000. Wow. What are you doing?
I work for a company called Fluid Stance in town.
You work for what?
A company called Fluid Stance in town. We make balance boards for people that work at standing workstations.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Great. So you're already off and running with that 500,000?
Yeah, a couple years ago, yeah.
And so you've used it all up and you're looking for the next round, or what?
No, we're self-sufficient now.
500,000, that's impressive. We had one of our guys, she had our artwork on leggings, and she raised 98,000, and that launched her company. So those types of fundings for new startups, it's brilliant. So crowdfunding, of course, there again, you have to make yourself look professional. You have to do a video. You have to show how you're going to use the money. So it's a really good way for you to get your company launched and to find some money that will fund you to the next level, right? So crowdfunding is really exciting. There's another platform that you may want to look at. It's called Beta Brand, but it's more for the clothing industry or accessories. Those of you in that company, they're in San Francisco, and it's a platform where they put your idea up, and people vote on it. If they get enough votes, they make it for you, and then you get a percentage of sales. So some of these companies have done really, really well with one product that's been made for them, and then they get their percentage back. So that was a really good way also to begin the branding process. So what is the upside of crowdfunding? It confirms your market, and it makes it really important that you do, as Julie was saying, about making sure that you do your due diligence, find out really, is there a need for this product? You know, you have people who are designing things in a closed room and they have no idea it's already existing. So you've got to do the due diligence and investigate the market and find out exactly, is there a niche for this? Is there a real need for this? And then that will also, through the crowdfunding, confirm that you have a good product. So incubators and accelerators, I know that, well, through my incubator in Los Angeles, we did do crowdfunding sessions, and crowdfunding also for investing sessions. So we had some people who were very successful in the industry, and they were willing to invest back into companies. So we would prepare the clients and go through due diligence with them, make sure that they have a product that's viable, and they have a business plan, they know what they're doing. You all seen Shark Tank, so you're familiar with how that goes as far as pitching to people, knowing and feel confident about going out there. And you have to be a little bit of an extrovert to be able to go out there and explain exactly and feel absolutely confident in what it is that you're doing. And so when you are asked these questions, you know, what are you going to use this money for and how are you going to use it, then you can then relate to where this money is coming from to make them feel comfortable. So the incubator idea is very good because they can often then help you all the way through it and sit with you maybe once a week and explain to you what you need to do, who you should be working with. And I know that we were talking about a lot about NDAs a minute ago. On my forms for profit, I have an NDA on there, which is in a dynamic format. You can massage it into your own NDA. Now, as far as NDAs, just to go a little bit, I'm off track, but NDAs also in the apparel industry, you can't get everybody sitting at a sewing machine signing an NDA. They won't do it. So NDAs are, to a certain degree, in the beginning are okay, but not when it comes into production. However, it's good to go out, show your ideas, and see if they will sign it. Okay, so next is angel investments. So obviously they want something back. Are you prepared to give back some money or shares, not money, shares in your business so that they can then invest in it? So and how much would that be? And you see that sort of negotiations going on with Shark Tank all the time about they want 50% or 55%. And I know a gentleman here was talking about going into partnership 50-50. We always talk about go in at least 49-51. One of you should be the managing partner. So it's only 2%, but it's important that you do have somebody in control. So angel investors, obviously, they love your idea, but they may not like you, so they're not going to invest in it. And you've seen that too on Shark Tank, where somebody's personality has come across in a way which has aggravated the investors, and they don't want to work with them. So coming across with a confident idea is also very important, but you can't be overconfident to the point where you're upsetting people and they don't want to work with you. It's a partnership. They want to work with you. They love the product. They like you. If they love the product and they don't like you, they're not going to invest in it. So it's important for you to understand the differences of going out there, meeting the people that can help you, and making sure that they feel comfortable working with you. So they can also open up doors all over the place that can get your products produced, know where to go. This gentleman here, that's what he does. And so there are so many important things that you need to know when you're going out there and starting a new business. And of course, financing it is crucial. And so sitting down, sometimes a lot of designers don't want to, oh, I'm just the designer. You've got to train the other part of your brain to think about making sure you understand the cost of the product and making sure that you understand when you've done the costing for that product, that there is enough in that product costing for you to make a profit. If you're doing a cost sheet and you miss off one important part, then what's going to happen? You're going to realize that there is suddenly not that profit margin that you had hoped would be in that cost sheet. And I've seen so many cost sheets where they've forgotten maybe, oh, I forgot to put in the interlining, I forgot to add a zipper. And suddenly, or one particular case I was working with, they were doing lingerie, and we were designing for Victoria's Secrets. And we were doing a teddy, and it was the repeat order, season after season after season. Well, the first season, they made it on 65-inch goods, right? So they got it at special price. And the next season, they ordered again, and it was in 45-inch goods, same price. Screwed over this company. I mean, it was their own fault. So if you carry over a product to another season, you have to make sure that you do the due diligence, recost, because it may not just be the fabric width, it could also be production, or it could be all the other things that are going into producing the goods, whether it's domestically or internationally. So finding the money and finding out when and who you want to work with, whether it's the bank, whether it's a friend or family, or whether it's an angel investor, is so important that you have a clear understanding of exactly where it's going to take you and how it's going to benefit you. Again, you may find somebody with money, but that you don't want to work with either. So again, it goes back to having those relationships and feeling confident with the people that you're working with, that you want to work with them. So if you suddenly find somebody who says, yes, I'm going to put in, 500,000, but you find out that they're going to drive you insane because they're calling you all times of the day and night and morning and all the rest of it, or they're trying to take over your idea, it's also, again, not advisable. So all these things about what you should and shouldn't do, a lot of it is going to be based on who you want to work with and how it will benefit you. So, okay, and venture capital. These things, of course, are you now in venture capital?
No, we're still funded.
Still funded? Very good. Is there anyone here in venture capital experiences? So finding the right venture capital people involved in who are experienced in your industry, very important that you have an investor who understands, otherwise you're both running around in the dark. Make sure that whoever you find to invest in you, and by the way, venture capitals won't invest until they see that there's proof of sales. They want to know that you can actually perform and there is a market and you understand your demographics. Because in the industry, in my industry, it's not just about inventing a new clip that could be used nationwide. If you're designing clothing and you're designing on the West Coast, but you're hoping to sell to the East Coast, or you're hoping to sell to maybe we say to Texas or to Florida, we always say, okay, did you add any bling or pink in that for Dallas or Florida? And so you know immediately that you are thinking about the demographics in these different parts of the country. And then you take it one step further, and you want to, I mean, we talk a lot about China. China's here to stay. We need to work with China, and maybe your money will come from China. You don't know. So China is strong. I've just got back from China. I'm working with China. There's a group of attorneys over there who are setting it up so that you will feel much more secure when you go to China. And I know you were talking about they are getting the act together, and they know they have to. So they love made in America products. They will go all over the place to find that. So if there's a way that you can sell it into their domestic market, which is bigger than our domestic middle market, then think about globally, expanding what you have, which could be opening up doors internationally, which I think the platform is going to go. And American products are loved all around the world. As you can see, I'm from England. Go back there and everybody looks like they're dressed from California, right? So this whole trend in lifestyle is because it's not so much about trends, what we're wearing, it's more like a lifestyle trend, what we wear, and merchandise. So understanding your possibilities to expand into other markets is going to affect how much money you need. So understanding those markets are crucial for you. Okay, so I hope that's helped you. It's obviously a lot more complicated than that. So if anyone's got questions about, particularly in the apparel industry, we've got factors, which is another thing which we don't normally have in other industries, where they will advance you money on orders that you've taken so that then you can use that money to produce the goods. Anybody got any questions?
It's just maybe not a question, but a point. I think it's important to differentiate your crowdfunding. You know, I mean, there's equity crowdfunding, and there's the things that you queried people. They're very different concepts at the funding level, especially now with like kind of the token base hype that's going on. I think equity funding, crowdfunding is important to understand. I mean, do you agree?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, as far as putting equity, as far giving equity to the funders is very important, absolutely. And how much that will be is also something you really need to understand as well.
And that's very different than Indiegogo.
Yeah. Oh, yes, definitely. Yeah, absolutely, two different things. Gentlemen.
Is there one type of funding that is more ideal than the other few that you listed?
Well, I would suggest in the beginning to self-fund if you can. And then that way you can then begin to show that you can prove that you've got your own sweat equity in it. And then that way also hopefully get sales so that you can go out and say, listen, this is what I've already done on my own. And people respect you for that you're putting your own money in, your skin in the game, and then you can go out and say, okay, I've already sold, $500,000 worth using my own money, or this gentleman's. How much did you put in the beginning?
I'm not the founder,
Oh.
But he was a couple $100,000 by the time we were.
See, the big thing is also how much money do you need to do for your product development? So product development can add up. I've had companies one lady, a banker, she wanted to come out with clothing which was a little bit more sexy for bankers, whichever that means. But anyway, so she went out and she had all these products made. And $54,000 later, she came in so proud, rolled it in a rolling rack, and I looked at it and I was like, if anyone knows how to make products, one of the biggest things is a tailored jacket. So you guys sitting in a tailored jacket, and she had the sandwiched collars, and it was just so bad. And I had to tell her there was not one sample that she could use, not one. $54,000 later. So knowing, and that's what Julie touched on too, knowing what you want before you go in. Giving these funny little sketches out. You need to give them instructions exactly what it is you want to have made. What kind of stitching, what sizing, what's the trims, all these things, because otherwise, if you don't know, they don't know. And you'll end up with something that's a no-no. So making sure that you know exactly what you want when you're doing your product development, that you're not losing all your investment is really important.
Okay, I was going to yell. I can do that pretty well. I was wondering if you have, in my case, I have a symbol, a branding, a logo that I want to use on a lot of merchandise, especially on fashion. In that case, where do we go regarding the licensing of something like that? And is that something that in the fashion industry is in one area? Do I need to know something that I don't know? I need to know a lot that I don't know, by the way.
Well, licensing, of course, we have an attorney over here who can address that. Usually you'll need to show that you have demand for the product before anyone's going to license it from you. So if you can show that you have a demand for the product, then maybe you can target who you want to work with. I know what you were talking about with your product. Well, I hope that's helped, and I have, as I say, a book called Fashion for Profit that gives you the ins and outs of how to start your own business. It's also used by colleges as a textbook, and it's got a teacher's guide with it as well. I'm over there. You're welcome to come and have a look at it. And thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
So we spent this morning kind of building the foundation of what do you need to be thinking about in terms of manufacturing. And hey, everybody, by the way, what about a big round of applause for our speakers, please. Thank you. And also, I gotta say, hey, you know what? All this happened only because of the team that works for me. So, everybody, so Saturn, Mel, Megan, everybody, thank you so much for your help and for putting up with me in the process. I appreciate it.